was,
That didn't come
yeah,
from-
that was an appeal.
That was,
Yeah.
the Hills,
The Hills.
The Hills.
Vermillion
That,
Road, or
you know, so,
Vermillion
I,
Frick.
you know, I think some of those things, if you look, you're gonna know better than me, but that it wasn't, it wouldn't have been as controversial if it wasn't quasi-judicial.
So I'm gonna give you another view of that.
Yeah, you don't have to read 6 pages though to everybody.
Is that all? Is that? I'll read them if you want me to. That's the issue. So understand this: if a subdivision is not quasi-judicial, that means you've got very objective standards. You either meet it or you don't. And I have, over my years, and seen situations like that where residents do get upset because the decision-making body doesn't have any room to negotiate with somebody, because if they check the box, you have no choice but to issue the permit. And so that's where you could also have folks feel like they're not being heard because, well, gosh, I'm this development's, causing too much of this, that, or the other thing. And even though, folks might have concerns with it, if they have to point to what section of the ordinance it's not meeting, and if it's meeting those standards, you can't do anything about it. You have to approve it. So there's that side of things. I will say this: we have modified our processes. The Nick and our kind of our subcommittee of planning board members of notification, how we notify people, and we are now spending more time educating people on the quasi-judicial process, so they just don't think that, hey, there's a subdivision, here's the special use permit, or this is the quasi-judicial meeting, and just that's it. We let them know now that it is, under sworn testimony, it's based on facts, it has to be based on criteria. You're not supposed to be talking to the elected officials or the staff, and nor the staff. In other words, we're spending more time trying to educate people as to what that process is, and it will always be trying to improve on that if we keep in the quasi-judicial process. But I know there's a lot of frustration from the residents because, well, we were there, and it was just frustrating every which way you looked at it. Yes, Nick.
Okay, so I'm a little bit slow, and so I'll go back to my question. So we'll use another example. So we had the Cook property recently, and then farther down Beatty's Ford Road, south of Hopewell, I forget what that, down by Lancaster's.
Oak Grove.
What was it?
Oak Grove.
Oak Grove. Okay, so Oak Grove, lots of community feedback. We ended up cutting off one of the roads, or that was in there.
Oak Grove was rezoning.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Oak Grove was a conditional rezoning, and that conditional rezoning kind of matched up with an area plan that was done, and so that's a little bit different than a by right subdivision.
So so back to my question about the Cook property. What was that?
That was quasi-judicial. It had, our subdivision ordinance has some subjective standards. So if there were issues that were raised, we could have used some of those standards to try to negotiate problems and try to avoid those things. But it was a quasi-judicial process. And if they meet the standards, you got to issue it. Even as quasi-judicial, the difference is with quasi-judicial, you have some subjective standards. The standard of, you have to do a development that's beneficial to, not create issues with your neighbors. Well, that's subjective.
Right.
And so
But I mean, we have connectivity requirements. We wouldn't just say it.
We have connectivity requirements, correct, yeah, so that's correct. But let me just again say, with the standards we have now, you have more flexibility to negotiate things than you would be if you wouldn't have any flexibility to negotiate things if you do a by right legislative subdivision approval.
Yes, I'd like to know if
Emily or Jacob would like to weigh in on this matter, in your opinion.
So with regards to subdivision, the way that the statute is set up is that if you are basing the decision on approving the subdivision, that process, if it includes any type of subjectivity, then Jack is correct that it has to be treated as quasi-judicial. Now, that's not to say that you can't change the process to legislative. However, if you do that, we would have to change the ordinance. So it wouldn't be something that we could do, immediately. We would have to go back through and change the standards in the ordinance itself so that they don't include any subjectivity. It can be done, but it would require those revisions. If you do that, and it's totally objective, then you could treat it as legislative.
Thank you.
Wow. I'll go with Commissioner Bales first.
So, just to be clear, and making sure I'm understanding what you're saying, if we leave it quasi-judicial, residents who are impacted still have the ability to come to speak to the board. We just can't speak to them outside of the confines of this space.
Yes, yes. So they can speak at the hearing under sworn testimony.
I think that's the piece that has been missing. I don't think people understand that piece. And if there's an opportunity to, if we're not changing it, there's an opportunity to educate folks, to help them understand that they have to come, they can't just pick up the phone. They need to come and swear in and share their statements and their comments in that hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we are working to continually improve that so that people have an expectation of what this thing is and have some knowledge is that they're just not walking into something cold and they keep telling the mayor, this is just not going to be good for our neighborhood, and the mayor has to say,
Right.
okay. That's,
I guess, and if we were to change some of the subdivision options to legislative, then we have no standing at that point if they meet the criteria.
correct. I mean, you have to issue the permit if they meet the
Hard
standards.
stop. So actually, residents would not even have an option to voice their concerns if we did that.
Residents will always have an opportunity to come and speak to you about their concerns. But just like the way it is with quasi-judicial, they'll have to go to that very objective standard and say, they are not meeting this standard. And so they always have an opportunity to come talk to you. It's
Okay.
just, now they're gonna have to pick out what objective standards are not being met in speaking to you, if it's a legislative decision process.
So then let me go back to, since we've used the Cook example, the Cook property example. If those changes had been made just by staff working through them with the developer, that would never have come to the board then, would it?
The Cook property any subdivision is gonna come to the board as a any subdivision by right. There's no rezoning. Is somebody zoned residential or rural or transitional or neighborhood residential, and they turn into subdivision, doesn't require any rezoning, it is always coming to the town board and the planning board. And did I not understand your
Quasi-judicial?
question?
I-
Yes,
I think I'm-
quasi-judicial,
But I'm
correct.
saying if we were to change the ordinance, change the text,
Oh,
then it would not have come to the board.
if you had changed the text to get rid of the subjective standards, as it was mentioned, it would probably still go to, it could go to the town board, it could go to the planning board. I'm not sure you want to just give the staff the right to approve it, but it would still come to some body for ultimate
So
decision.
it would not have been just by right.
When we talk about by right, okay, I kind of overlap the terms. A subdivision by right is a subdivision where they don't need rezoning, and so I use that term by right.
Right.
But that is not quite the by right when somebody walks in and asks for a residential building permit on a residential piece of property and you never see it, or a McDonald's, or whatever the things.
Okay,
So
Well, this-
I'm sorry if I,
It's a major subdivision, so typically what you'll see in most ordinances, if it's a process, decide to change it legislative, being it's a major subdivision, it's gonna come back before this board. You just, as Jack was saying, if you write in these criteria, if they meet the street lengths, if they meet the lot size, they meet, all those standards, pretty much it's impossible for you to turn down. If you turn it down, you're gonna lose.
Ladies are seeing frustration with in terms of not being able to talk to the citizens, whereas approved by staff, but as far as the overall process being quasi, the process would be legislative. So I just wanted to point that out, that we can't pick and choose based on the project which type of process to apply, because it has to be in our ordinance.
So to follow up on the mayor's question, then let's go back to the Brighton example. What pushed that from being a minor change that the staff could approve to it had to come back to us?
So-
What's that delineation? And
So
maybe
the-
there's a way to give some more flexibility to staff to say, hey,
so that, I don't have my ordinance in front of me, but the section that we're dealing with said, define major change in the subdivision ordinance as significant alteration of the street patterns. And that was, didn't say it didn't say internal, if it was internal or external, that's where it starts to make a big impact. Is externally, it starts connecting or disconnecting in areas, that's when it's a big impact. So if we changed the ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, to say, minor changes could include significant changes in the road patterns that are internal to the project and do not affect any of the adjoining property owners, then that would have been something that staff could have just signed off on and approved as long as they met the standards.
Jack, could you do like I'm just asking a question here, but could you do, and I don't know if this is a magic number, 50 lot subdivision or less, I'm just picking a number, or considered, will not go through the quasi judicial process, but anything above that, would have to go through quasi judicial. I'm being simplistic, but could you?
Yeah, I would caution against that simply because if there's subjective standards, quasi-judicial process, and so I think you would want to be, the qualitative nature of those standards, you'd want it to apply to a 40-lot subdivision as well as a 200-lot subdivision. Is if there's no roads, or there's no cross easements for drainage, and so, we sign off on those today. If you wanted to, say 10 lots or less, if you wanted to change something, you could do all kinds of stuff. Yes, if you wanted to do that today, we have the authority, staff, to approve minor subdivisions, and those are usually just, on a state road, somebody's going to cut some lots out. Those are things that we approve internally.
Commissioner Munger?
Yeah, probably a question for our attorney. Can we word it so that, assuming the change resulted in a reduction in density,
Yeah, no, there are limitations on what can be.
sorry,
The statute defines what can be considered minor modifications that staff can approve. And with regards to density changes, that's specifically not one of the ones that staff can approve as a minor modification.
all right, so much for that.
Commissioner Ryan?
Yeah, I think that, Commissioner Walsh and I started serving in late 2017, and that we changed to quasi-judicial, I think, in 2018, 2019? We were legislative before,
No, it's been quasi-judicial.
so we just didn't have any.
It's just been quasi-judicial
just lucky.
really since 2000,
you miss them.
really 2003.
Oh, okay. So, I think the concern for me is, we don't have the opportunity to speak with residents. I think the last time we met here together as a board, we had the Hill subdivision, and we had a lot of people call us, and I guess either I was just taught, you just can't communicate with anybody. So, there's times that I wouldn't return phone calls, but most of the time I would return the phone call and say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about this. They'd at least appreciate that. And I just remember sitting here thinking, this meeting could have been a lot shorter if we had the opportunity to at least have conversations like, I'm sorry, I want to listen to your concerns. However, this is technically a use by right process. it meets our ordinance. I mean, I don't think we would have been through the situation we were through, so how do we prevent that in the future? I don't necessarily know if I have the right answer, but I think if we can make some minor changes to it, I think it would really help the public to understand. I mean, it's the worst thing for me to hear is that, well, they're not listening to us. They're just not listening to us. So, you know, I'm looking at staff and saying, what do you think is the best process? If there's some ways we can make some modifications, I mean, the SUP approach, but again, I'm not the expert, so I'm gonna fall back to you all, which is the best to protect us. But is, in the quasi-judicial, is there a way for us to communicate with people? And is the only ramification we just have to disclose at the beginning? I mean, I guess I'm okay with doing that. And then one other thing I'd state, with it being quasi-judicial, I know the mayor was reading, and even you, Mr. Semino, you mentioned, the planning board made this recommendation, however, you can't go based off of that information. So does the planning board in a quasi-judicial, can we remove that process, that step from the process?
I'm not sure where to start. Let me start with the last,
Sorry.
the last thing you said. So just taking a step out, I mean, again, you could, quasi-judicial, you could just send something, you can just assign the planning board that responsibility to do quasi-judicial and it not come to you. Or you could keep it like it is today, which is planning board, recommendation, town board. I guess the positives of going to a planning board is there's different bites at the apple, and the apple keeps getting better and better as you know as you kind of goes through the process. So you could certainly cut out the planning board, but you won't have the potential benefit of having some design improvements as a result of that interaction between the developer, the community, and the planning board. Does that answer your last question?
Yeah, sorry, the
Maybe
first
not
part
in
was rambling.
The first part was
I had a
just
question a long time ago, and then they all kept
well. The
asking questions.
first part is a recommendation of a process. Now, I'm just going to say if it's quasi-judicial and there's not supposed to be ex parte discussion. I think you were asking, well, could there be that and then it just be disclosed during the hearing? So I'll just.
It's a great question. How do we interact with the public without sounding like we're ignoring them?
Well, again, first off, it is, we as a staff need to be doing a job of trying to explain to people that you have an opportunity to talk to the town board. It is during the quasi-judicial hearing process. It has to be under sworn testimony, and it has to be based on facts. And here's what the subdivision ordinance says. So if you have a concern about a development, you need to know what these criteria are and pick what you think it doesn't meet. And then you need to come up and get sworn in and present that to the town, because that's the process that we've got.
Well, and I think the Hills was like the worst of a quasi-judicial hearing process I've ever seen. I mean, we had a mom who was trying to give her sworn testimony and frankly just told us, she said, I'm the expert about my kids' safety. So that was not fun to hear a mom feel like we didn't respect the safety of her child and her opinion that her child wasn't going to be safe. So if we move to something more like legislative, could we have a public safety portion where that mom could say her piece? Because to her, that is the facts, and everybody has their truth, and I think that should be respected.
So I guess I'd start to answer that by saying that if you did it legislative, they could speak, but there wouldn't be any ability to do anything different. You got to approve it. What was happening was trying to continually re-educate people. Now we need facts. We need facts, and if you're coming up and not presenting facts, that we can't consider that. And so people were advised when they were going down that path that you're not. We need the facts. I guess it's possible to let people ramble on that not facts and give you their opinions, but then when you come to the decision making, you can't consider any of that. It has to be factual related. I didn't think we'd take the 45 minutes or hour to get to this, but you're asking some really tough questions that I just, it's difficult to give you a kind of a black and white answer to, but I'm not sure it's advisable for folks, and I'll rely on Emily, just let anybody get up and speak, that it's not, and they're not presenting facts. I guess you could, but then you have to make it clear your decision isn't including that.
But would legislative give them more opportunities to speak from certain viewpoints if we have, XYZ is like public safety, this, that, and the other? Because during that, quasi-judicial, in that moment, that mother's truth, in fact, was the safety of her child.
Right. So I'll go ahead and try to answer that one. And in my opinion, the answer would be, it's not going to be any different, because if we go legislative, the mother can talk about child safety, but if the developer checked all the boxes, then you're just not going to consider it anyways. And contrast that with if it's quasi-judicial and the person gets up and speaks about the safety of their child and so forth, you can let that go on, which is kind of the question I'm asking Emily. Let that go on, but in the end, when they're done saying their piece, you can't base a decision on that. So you're still at the same, in my view, kind of at the same place. The only difference is if you're quasi-judicial and you're just saying, look, we can't consider, you're telling them up front, you're giving me testimony, but this is not the facts. You need to pick a section of the ordinance that doesn't meet. That's, I understand, frustrating, and I would agree with you. The Hills was one of the toughest ones.
And when I sat here and I listened to that quasi-judicial, I thought to myself, if this board had the opportunity to speak with them, there may have been 2 people instead of 20 people that spoke. And the mayor wouldn't have to have constantly gotten into this is only fact-based, because they're not understanding, because it's an emotional process at the time.
Well, and with the mom, like, for example, that one just really hit me, because who are we to tell her what's safe for her child? And if we weren't under quasi-judicial with her or the other people that were so concerned, we could have had those conversations of, okay, but this is what they have to do, and we could have gotten rid of a lot of that fear and concern that could have been explained away with a good conversation, especially involving environmental stuff, because that's above us. That's the county, that's the state, and it would have, I feel like, just made the process much easier on the public, not so much us. We're up here to take a beating, but for them.
Well, I took the biggest beat.
You really did.
The other thing we might be able to do here, and Jack sort of alluded to education, is maybe we need a 1-page fact sheet because we all get the emails, right? Yeah. And it's just, they might get it 6 times, but it's a fact sheet that says this is a quasi-judicial proceeding, blah, blah, blah. I hate to do this, Jack, but contact the planning department if you have specific questions about safety or whatever those things, because every one of us is sending back a different email saying, hey, we can't talk about this, or whatever, however people respond back. Maybe we need something that articulates that, please, we can't talk about it. So,
Well, and to give those residents an opportunity to build their case. So if we're educating them on the front end, right? Then they have that opportunity prior to coming to the hearing to build their case.
Right, including those who have standing, because
Correct.
I know the mayor had to turn several people, if I remember correctly, and, people lived across town. It's like, well, where do you live? Are you adjoining the property? I forget, there were 2 or 3 things, and he'd have to say, well, you don't have standing here. Well, somebody spent a bunch of time to come down here, so I don't know, maybe there's a way to pre-educate.
Jack, is a neighborhood meeting required under this same scenario?
Yes. So whenever there's a subdivision, there is a neighborhood, yes.
Yeah, so, I think that for my personality and the way that I talk to most people when I talk, now's the opportunity, in a situation like this, it's a use by right, but try to create a win-win. If I had the opportunity to talk to some of those people, maybe half of them wouldn't have shown up, but at least they would have had the opportunity to talk at the neighborhood meeting to try to create a win-win. Maybe they can't control the overall outcome, but that would give the opportunity for the developer to listen to, the residents, which they probably do, and then still possibly make some changes that we have the opportunity to do under a quasi-judicial, because, through the process, I guess. But again, that throws it back on the developer and allows them to negotiate directly to create the win-win, and maybe that reduces some of the conflict that we have.
So, I mean, so as we're talking about this, you know, we've always, with the neighborhood meeting, it's the developers meeting, they have the meeting, they do their thing. Your point is well taken. What if we were to do the neighborhood meeting and staff does the introduction? We're here, it's a subdivision process. Let me tell you about the process, and then use that opportunity to explain the process, what you gotta do, why the developer's here talking to you, and then use it as an education, use the neighborhood meeting as another education tool, use the adjoining letter that we send out to people as an education tool, and then maybe have a kind of a stock response, so that if you do get an email, that you can send this to them that does it. So all of those things are part of that education process, but I think we would be wise to do that, is to just take 10 minutes before the neighborhood meeting interaction starts to say, you know, staff sets the table as to what's happening, and do it right up front, and then turn it over to the developer. So I think that would be
That's a great idea.
yeah, thank you.
I was just gonna say, that's excellent, Jack. If we stay with quasi-judicial, I think those are great. If you ultimately, I'm just listening to everybody here, but if it's, look, I wanna talk to the applicants and my citizens and folks that voted for me throughout the process, if that's what the majority wants, then we need to change it. I like what Jack is saying. I like his ideas of, you know, letting staff get involved in those community meetings and pushing out that information. That will help a lot. But if I'm hearing stuff here and you ultimately want to be able to talk to folks throughout the process, then we have to change it if that's what you want to do. I'm not saying that's what we need to do. I'm just saying I'm hearing some of that. Then we can't have the quasi-judicial process and actually talk to citizens throughout the process. So that's ultimately what it boils down to.
Commissioner Bowe?
I think we need to address who's the expert and who's not. When we did this Hill presentation, the applicant, right as we got to start, gave us all a really nice binder, and he wanted that put into the record as evidence, and we voted that into the record. But not one of us had the chance to read it. I think that was wrong. But we wouldn't listen to a lady who's lived there for 8 years. She was not allowed to be an expert on the safety of her street when it comes to her children. I got a real disconnect there. Somebody that lives in South Charlotte and has a presentation that says this street is safe at these hours, but this lady that lives there, her testimony is not even allowed. That's my issue with this whole thing.
Yeah, but if you recall, it wasn't even relevant, the expert that the applicant brought, so.
It's the whole, it's the optical thing, John. I mean,
Yeah, I
here's the
understand.
evidence. We wouldn't even have a chance to read it yet. We'll take it in. That wasn't right.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have to accept it.
Well, you know, this is not, we don't do this every day.
Right. So I think, the way I look at it is if there's a way of minimizing the quasi-judicial for some minor things, I would think like Brighton, and then upfront neighborhood meeting, somebody has to be there to let people understand what this is going to be and who has standing, and really help them define who has standing. And if that has to be our attorney be there or somebody, because, you know, of the people at the Hills, technically, we had 2 or 3 people that had standing, and then they had to understand that they actually could ask questions and be part of that whole process. And that must have been frustrating for somebody who showed up at the meeting, couldn't even talk, or had to cut them off, and then like, well, this guy's asking all these questions about so-and-so. So
cross-examining part. So text amendment to expand minor changes that staff could do, keep it out of quasi-judicial, use the neighborhood meeting as an education process. Our notices that go out, we'll use that as an education process, and maybe build a summary of, you know, that we can provide and can talk about, you know, process and standing and where they find the rules at and who can you talk to. Because if folks could just talk to us, we can help. All right, what is your concern? Okay, so here's some criteria that you might want to be looking at. So these are
Yeah,
things.
some kind of
that-
FAQ sheet that the board could send out.
Yeah,
Right, okay.
FAQ.
I don't know, somebody behind the
Emily, do you have
screen.
something else to say?
No, I don't necessarily have anything to add. If we're gonna leave it as quasi-judicial, I think that is a good idea to have the fact sheet and possibly have something about, what the quasi-judicial process is, maybe on the planning website. In terms of the special use permit, I know, Brian, you had a question about that, Commissioner Hines. And, that is possible to move it to another board, such as the Board of Adjustment, which already works with, with quasi-judicial process. I would defer to Jack as to whether he thought planning board or Board of Adjustment would be more appropriate, given what, usually requires a special use permit. But I know that was a question you had, is it possible? And yes, it is possible to move, special use permits to another board if you wanted to.
Can I ask a quick question about special use permits? Or maybe it's not a question, more of a statement. My only concern about moving it to a planning board or board of adjustments is those are appointed positions and we were elected to make those decisions. I would not be in favor of assigning special use permits to another committee, for that very reason. We were elected to make those heavy, do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, I would hate to have had the driving range determined by planning board or board of adjustment, so I'd agree with Commissioner Bales.
You would rather it be?
No, I would agree that it should stay with the town board. I quit just saying board. Town board, I would have hated to see something as controversial as the driving range being put on the planning board and/or the Board of Adjustments.
Well, but I'm gonna take it back to quasi-judicial, because it's my least favorite thing about all of this, is that we work for the citizens, so for me, it's like, okay, we're just gonna direct them to staff, and we're gonna ignore them, and I would feel slighted if I were a citizen. So we need to take that into consideration too, because they have the right to reach out to us, and we need to be respectful of that instead of just pushing them off on staff. But if we do stick with quasi-judicial, I even think in our agenda, because more people are paying attention to these meetings, we need an asterisk beside whatever's quasi-judicial and then a footnote at the bottom explaining quasi-judicial. So when the agendas come out, people know, oh, okay, I need to email this person. I don't need to email the board, and then we're not getting a weekend of being chewed out, because that happened to me at work. And I'm just like, I can't talk to you, I'm sorry.
And I agree with you, and I think in addition to the little asterisk beside on the agenda, that you give our town website where it gives you the rules and how you proceed through
And
a
under
quasi-judicial
projects,
hearing.
highlight even on our website, which ones are quasi-judicial, so that's just more information for the public to know, because I would feel really frustrated.
With a definition of who has standing, what does that mean?
Right.
Can you ask questions? Yes, you can. That type of simple explanation of how the hearing works and what tools that residents have that they can bring into the meeting and into the hearing to explain their facts.
And you're right, explain it. I mean, nobody would be in a court and just stand up and go up to the judge and say, hey, I want to talk about something. I mean, you just know that you couldn't do that. So I think the more that we can sort of frame it as this is a hearing, there are rules, just like when you go to court, they'd probably make the connection a little better.
Education is key.
And I do want to thank staff for giving us the project list and listing the quasi-judicial, because, just as I saw a few weeks ago, to remind everybody that Cook property is quasi-judicial.
That was helpful.
That helps
That was
a
helpful.
lot.
Jack, I mean, I think under SUP, like if I look under, for example, across the street from me, the wedding venue was approved not long ago. So it's permitted, it's a permitted use with a special use permit. So as long as they do everything that's required for the special use permit, we technically can't turn it down anyway, is that correct? Without a possible lawsuit?
You can't turn it down if they meet all the regulations, that's correct.
Is there any subjectivity to that? Can we negotiate anything with them, or is,
Frankly, I don't know the wedding venues SUP standards. It's usually, it's not unusual. One of the typical standards you see is not adversely affect adjoining properties. That's pretty,
yeah,
that's pretty subjective.
right.
Can be. I mean, if you didn't want to have special use permits, that's your choice. And in the past, the town board has wanted to have the ability to say yea or nay to those things, but if there are uses that you feel like can go somewhere else, then that's your right. We heard a couple board members say they want to keep that. That's
Yeah.
what I've heard over the years, but it's totally up to this board.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should assign the SUP to another board, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I guess there was consensus, I believe, to keep it on this board, correct?
That's what it is. That's what it is. Just my, just my thought.
Sure. All right, just press your mute button for the next 15 minutes, and we'll be back unless there are any other questions.
Mayor, just real quick, can y'all see the TV screens and all right up there?
Yep.
Obviously, I should ask that. And then, staff, if you're making your presentations, remember if you use the laser, we don't have annotation here like we do in the boardroom, so they can't see it on their TV screen. So just remember as you're
I think
doing your presentation, if you're pointing up there with your laser pointer, they won't be able to see it. That's it. Facebook also, Mayor, has been up and down, up and down. I think, Larry, we're box casting, and obviously we're recording this. It will be, you can go back and look at it 1,000 times if you want to, so not trying to hide anything. It's just,
I gotta see what happens.
it's been up and down here and there and yonder.
Check in on what the press conference for that is.
We don't know. Larry, you gonna mute us?
Okay, we're ready to go. I gave you 15 minutes.
I like. Does that mean we get to leave early?
Well, then you took it back.
No.
Then you just took it back. It's way too serious.
Trying to keep the flow.
I know. I'm just busting your chops.
Where's your better half?
She's sitting inside her living room right now, probably in sweatpants, relaxing.
I was on a call with Ryan and Haley. She's there in her sunroom, cats and walking around, looking at the golf course. Yeah, Nick, we're really in last place. It's 15 years.
And this is just based on all total.
Another name here is how about you?
3 times as high.
Yeah, but we don't have that many more
It's a good
people.
thing we're getting all this rain,
So-
given the drought
Signed
we
up.
had.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Mooresville came out, they have almost 800 people signed up.
I don't think my yard has been dry since sometime.
I think Mooresville's cheating.
Yeah, I think they went from 100 to 700.
Yeah. In Vermillion,
They have a lot more employees.
Warfield basically slammed the
yeah, they got
so
400.
houses like this.
Yeah.
And
It's a little,
on that side,
because I think they count their school employees, but they have like a water department and stuff. Yeah.
Can't get
Yeah, they-
going to the trash is an adventure.
Okay, we ready? Good morning, Mr. McDaniel.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Good to see everybody in person. It's been a while for a few of us, but wanted to give you an update on our economic development efforts for the town. We've had to adjust, as everyone has, obviously. I thought I'd give a quick little update on our COVID response. Back in March of last year when all this hit, obviously there was a lot of confusion on who was deemed essential, especially from our local manufacturers. So we did a lot of work with Mecklenburg County, reaching out to manufacturers to let them know that they were deemed by Mecklenburg County to be essential, and they can continue production. We actually had calls from plant managers concerned about their employees getting to work, so we let them know, they're approved. We sent all the emails and notifications so that they would be made aware if they needed. And literally, we told them you could print this out and give it to your employees if you wanted to. But as we all know, there was a lot of confusion in the early days. We did transition into doing a lot of work with not just companies in our community, just throughout the region, trying to connect them with NC Emergency Management to see if they can produce PPE or any of the medical supplies that were needed. So we were able to make some connections there. We were working with companies from Hickory, really you name it. So it's all hands on deck, as you can imagine. But luckily, a lot of our companies have transitioned, and some are up, some are down. But all in all, still moving forward as we hopefully get back to some sense of normal soon. So, as you know, we do represent Cornelius Davis in Huntersville, really focused on bringing new jobs and investment to these 3 towns, as well as helping our local companies that are here grow. You do have a lot of representation on the board from the town. Both Commissioner Bells and Anthony, the town manager, sit on the board of directors, as well as Don with Electric Cities, and you also have companies represented, as well as folks who live in Huntersville, and Mayor Annarella attends a lot of our meetings as well, and is a good partner with us. Just wanted to give you an update on some of the projects that have recently completed. If you've been down Patterson Road recently, huge change from the way it looked 2 years ago. It's paved, the sidewalks are in, and then Kerr's has their new facility in place. We were fortunate enough to take a quick tour. It is beautiful. As you can imagine, it's, I would say, part office and headquarters, part manufacturing, and will really be a showcase community for our showcase location for our community. Looking forward to having events there, hopefully soon. And we're actually I'm optimistic we're gonna be able to have one of our manufacturing network events there coming up later this year. Another beautiful building, Pester. This is located in the park, just right off of Reese Boulevard. Really top-notch architectural design. We're actually working with them on, we had a virtual event yesterday and the day before on the supply side, and Pester was one of our participants from Mecklenburg County. So beautiful building. We're glad that one is completed and really nice asset to the town. We need to update this picture now that the construction has started, but Certex has started their expansion on Mount Holly Huntersville Road, just sort of across the street from the DMV facility. That building is coming along. As you can see, it's going to be a really nice design, and we look forward to having some kind of ribbon cutting once that's complete. So we went back and sort of updated on the project activity in the town. We're close to $200 million of new investment, over 700 new jobs, and 1 million new square feet to the area. So really proud of that. That's helpful for the town residents to have a place to work, have a place to, and it also helps balance out the tax base, obviously, with that kind of non-residential impact. I always want to give a quick update on how the town fits into the what we call the development process. Screenings that high level. It's now, as you can imagine, everything is online or virtual, so companies are making decisions. Where do they want to locate? We're hearing frequently now companies are saying Charlotte, Nashville, Atlanta are very frequently targets. We're working on a project right now that had those three in particular. So at that screening level, sort of filtering its way down from the decision-making process of what areas do we want to be located in. Site work is where we get involved, helping them find a site or building that works best, and then getting them to the point where negotiation begins. So once again, we're not brokers by intent. So we don't impact that negotiation on the lease or the sale of the property, but we do get the companies or their consultants to those decision makers. And that's where we'll bring the town in as well. Luckily, you guys have a great staff. We work with transportation, planning, legal, admin, finance, you name it, to walk them through the process of developing in our community. And then once the company's here, we don't just say, thanks, we're glad to have you here. We call on them frequently, make sure everything's going smoothly, see if there's any issues that we can resolve. Luckily, the town's very efficient, but if they need to have the question for the state or at the county level, we can help them get through those channels and make the process much quicker. So we have answered crazy questions, and we're always out there for our companies as they continue to grow. We try to call on them once they get established. We give them some time to get settled. But within that first year, we try to make sure we either call or we're on site, meeting them, making sure all their needs are met. And as they continue to grow within our community, make sure they're comfortable. And if there's any expansion plans, we're aware of that. So our project count, we are pacing much better than we were in the fall. The October number dropped close to 20, which was a significant drop for us. We did see a nice uptick back in November, getting past the election, and then we had positive vaccine numbers. Those seem to help us, not just our community, but regionally and statewide. I've tried to track what's happening, and the state folks are telling us the same thing, that we're on a nice track. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand, which is encouraging, so we're going to be in a good position as people feel comfortable traveling, people start feeling more comfortable making these site visits. We're going to be in a good position. We actually have a visit with some real estate consultants coming up on Monday, so we'll change that. And we try to keep the project status as up to date as we can. We have CRM, so we go in, and once we have a visit, we mark that as well. So we try to keep as much information out in the public as we can, but obviously these projects are secret. The companies don't want too much information out until they're ready to make their announcement. And our real estate, you can see in total of all three communities, we have over 270 properties. So that could be a site or a building. or an area that can be subleased within a larger multi-tenant building. So you're seeing right now that Huntersville has 179 of those total properties. So you're actually, as a percentage, you have more of the total space than you did last year. It's 66 as opposed to 58%.
Is there a certain lot size when it counts to 179 properties? Are all over 10 acres or?
So it's everything that's in the commercial everything in site index. So
Okay, okay.
majority of those, I would say, are over 1,000 square foot. Most people won't go ahead and put that into the system.
There's a lot of different property types.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay,
good
perfect.
question. We have a good variety.
Okay.
This is the most exciting slide for me. So when I started back in 2013, we had 0 spec buildings in all 3 towns. Right now, we have over 4.3 million square feet in process, which is an eye-opening figure. We have buildings that are in final review. We have buildings that are getting ready to start construction, and we have buildings that are in site plan and review with all 3 towns. So 18 total buildings right now are in the process in the town of Huntersville. So I talked about the pent-up demand. This is going to put us in a great position as companies start to emerge from this and are eager to find space. We're going to have a lot of variety of options for them. And I think personally, companies are going to say, we don't have time to build. We need to find existing space. So we're going to be well positioned as we come into the summer and the start of our new fiscal year to see some opportunities there. It's a unique mix of space. It can be used for distribution, manufacturing, and office. So, and we have a wide variety of buildings. We have buildings 70,000 square feet up to over 500,000. So we have a really good mix coming into play. And we're excited. We're going to push these as these buildings start coming out of the ground. We're going to push a marketing blitz with a lot of the Charlotte and statewide economic development folks, as well as folks in the real estate community.
Ryan, real quick, if I could, how are the spec spaces that are available? Are their absorption rate's pretty good? I mean, I know we have stuff over in Brighton that was built. I mean, I don't know if that was 500,000 square feet or 1 million square feet total, and then up there at Commerce Station, are they, I guess, it must be absorbing pretty well because we're having all this other stuff coming online.
Yeah, Commerce Station is full, and Mr. Silver's actually planning to start a second building.
Okay.
So he's actually, the grading has started. Brighton, we now have, I'd say 30 to maybe 40%, probably 35% leased out, and the momentum's building. So I think in our world, when you tour a building and it's a big empty space, it's hard for sometimes to visualize, you know, how will my space look when you drop a ceiling and have warehousing in the back. So that momentum's building, and they've adjusted their price point, and I think the market's really adapted to that. So,
What is this space typically leasing for? Square foot?
yeah, it all depends. It's a
Okay,
bad
yeah,
question.
I know.
Yeah, but it's we're at right now at Brighton. I think we're quoting around a 9 rough, but it all it's determined by the build out.
Sure.
So we always tell folks, if you need more office, obviously that's more expensive. If you just need small minimal office and then warehousing in the back, that'll be cheaper.
So is $9 like a shell space?
Yeah, that's sort of our starting
That's
point.
really good.
Yeah. So now obviously there's some TICAM built into that, but they're pretty aggressive right now, and we're seeing it for the migration north from what you're seeing at Metrolina down in Charlotte. That's leased up, and we're starting to see the bubble that we weren't. If you remember from last year's slide, we had that little bubble. We're filling in that bubble with real estate options right now.
I think it's fantastic, just to let the board know, I mean, there's some space, industrial space like this that just 10 years ago, even 8 years ago, was being leased for $3.50 a square foot. And I mean, COVID's helping this whole industry anyway when it comes to flex space and industrial, especially with
finance. We've definitely, it's not unique to us, but to have a number over 4 million square feet companies. So we're seeing a good mix right now, which is exciting. We do have our industrial side or flex side, we're in a good position. Our office, we're starting to see some interest in the below 50,000 square foot range. And we have a couple options there as well. So right now, I'd say we're okay. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd love to see some spec office coming online, but I think as we fill up some of the space that's out there right now in the market, you could see that happen. We mentioned Commerce Station. That's the joint venture between the three towns in Mecklenburg County. Updates on what's happened there. Mr. Silver, his building is leased out, so that was the last building at the end of Commerce Station Drive. And then he's got a pad, or he has a pad, just to the west, and they've started construction there as well. So that'll be good news. As you drive down Commerce Station Drive now, you're seeing the back of that building. So you're seeing the docks and the drive-in doors and some storage. So once that new building or secondary building's built, you'll see the nice facade as you continue down Commerce Station Drive. So that'll be a nice addition to that park. I always want to talk about our job openings. Anyone can go to our website right now. It's not a job board, but we do try to provide local job opportunities and openings that are validated. So we know the companies, we know they're in our community, and we try our best to keep it up to date. As you can imagine, there are lots of different jobs. So rather than tracking every job, we just have a direct link to those individual pages, but you can apply by clicking through our page. So we do get a lot of activity on our website. Feel free to use that as a resource, and we also have a couple links on that to our local chambers, various job boards as well, so you can click through to all three. And then we've always, workforce development continues to be a big trend and discussion in the economic development world. We've had to adjust as everyone has, but we still have our website, Ascend LKN. We've added the healthcare module within the past year, so you can now click through there and see opportunities for career pathways for healthcare careers, from careers that require associate's degree up to the highest level. So we want to show that there's a wide variety of positions out there. It's not just, you have to be down the physician track or RN track. There are opportunities out there, and there's jobs out there as well. We're going to add the IT component next. I think we're going to have a good variety there as well. There are jobs out there that you can be able to acquire just going through CPCC and picking up some of their coding training. We've heard stories of folks who have bachelor's degrees in non-related fields, and they're getting really strong, high-paying jobs because they went back to community college and were able to pick up coding. So I think that's a great opportunity. We have adjusted recently with going virtual with some of our events. We just had a very successful speed networking event, thanks to Melinda and the whole team with Educational Collaborative and the Lake Norman Chamber. This year we had all three high schools. Normally we just have one. I think it was pretty successful for our first run. We had a couple little technical hiccups, which we're all getting used to Zoom now, but great questions from the students, really strong engagement. We were really pleased. I think we may try to keep that format because it allows us to touch Huff, North, and Hopewell as opposed to just one school at a time. Also, we've had virtual job fairs. When this hit, obviously people weren't certain how to be in person, so we worked with the town of Davidson and the Iredell County EDC to help folks who may have transitioned out of Ingersoll Rand when they had some job changes. So that was a different event for us, and we're still open to having those. No one's really figured out the best module yet, or the best method, so I think it's a learning curve for all of us. And then this past week we had an event called Stream, and that was an event that we coordinated with local economic development groups as well as the state of North Carolina and North Carolina to have a virtual trade show focused on supply chain for manufacturers. We had really good feedback. It was our first time doing this, and it was all virtual, so it was different. You had a virtual booth as opposed to an in-person booth, but we had really good breakout sessions, really informative on the impact of COVID on supply chain, as well as opportunities moving forward. I learned a lot about how manufacturers think, how they're going to adjust to the new world, new reality we're in. Everything's not coming back to the United States, but there are opportunities for crucial products that are vital to these manufacturers. They need to be here, as well as inventories are going to go up as well. manufacturers are a little apprehensive about having to wait for parts to get here from overseas, so they're to keep more on hand, which will lead to larger facilities with more warehousing. So that could be another good opportunity for us moving forward. Moving forward to 2021, biggest challenges, we talked a little about office space. I've talked to multiple office developers and brokers, and no one has this thing figured out yet. We don't know if companies are going to, everyone, eventually go back to normal and have the traditional model. The co-working that was becoming super popular, where you had a lot of shared space. We've had companies tell us, unfortunately, that just doesn't work for us anymore. But our office was, they called it old school, and they said we had private offices, and we went back to that, and it's worked well. So you wear your mask within the office, but when you get into your personal space, you can take it off. So we're not sure if things are going to shift back to more private office space, or if companies are going to keep more of a hybrid model, or if we're going to end up with folks, uncertain. And if you look at what's happening in other metros, San Francisco, for example, huge amount of property available for sublease right now, as big companies like Salesforce and other entities have said we can go virtual full time. So we're seeing how that's going to adjust for us. I think positives, smaller communities like the Charlotte region, Nashville, are really hot right now. We're seeing companies that are looking to come out of Manhattan. We have a visit, not next week, but another one from a company from Manhattan that's looking to, move to another more secondary market. And then I hate to say suburban, but sort of suburban markets outside of the central city are also a good option. So the trends could be really positive for us. We just need to, I guess, collectively as a real estate market, figure out how the office space is going to look moving forward. So we'll get there. And I think companies are having big decisions right now, trying to figure out how they're going to address this. And then for us, particularly in the Lake Norman area, if you look back at our project activity, you notice a trend, lots of international projects. So we've obviously been slowed by the damper in travel. So we're excited that our friends at the regional and state level will be able to get on the road. Hopefully June, July is the time frame they're telling us now. So we need them on the road. They have done a great job having virtual events where they have a presentation about the Charlotte region for companies around Europe, and it's virtual, but you have the time difference. It's 8 hours, 7 hours to, between Germany and the States. So you have to work around that. And then obviously it's just better sometimes to have folks in the community for a site visit or tour. So once they get back on the road, we'll have our team in Europe, we'll have the team in China and Asia, and then the State Department has offices around the world. So I think that'll be a good opportunity. Right now it continues to be a challenge. We know there are companies who want to visit, but they're just not comfortable. We're hearing, we had a visit earlier in the summer, and as opposed to flying, the company brought 3 delegates, and they all 3 drove separately from Kentucky. So it's different, and we're all adjusting, and we're still having site visits. That's been a big adjustment for us. Normally we meet at the office, have a presentation, maybe drive around the community together in one car. Now we're all caravanning or just meeting at the site. So we're adjusting, but it's still working, and we're still seeing good project activity. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions?
Not a question, but one to address, a goal.
Sure.
So one of the bring back items, and Ryan, this is for you.
Yeah.
On our FY20 goals, identify next area of growth for economic development, expansion of, and in parentheses, it had expansion of Commerce Station, new sites for business growth. So I thought, while you're here, maybe we could address that if that's okay.
Yep.
Well, what's your plans and how are we
Absolutely.
doing? Something about that.
Yeah, so we're working right now. We have an area of target of interest for future growth. We've got a few little hiccups we need to get through, but we have already engaged a local engineering firm, and once we get the hiccups, I don't want to It's a little sensitive because of the project isn't, or the property isn't closed on yet, so I don't want to impact any transactions. But once we get through that, we're going to engage a local group to come in and do an engineering study. Let us know where are the water lines, the sewer lines, natural gas lines, what's the electrical capacity at the site, so that we can provide that to the development community if they're interested in building something. So we have an area targeted, and we see the potential there. It's zoned appropriately, and we're optimistic, because even though we continue to talk about, we have a lot of buildings coming out of the ground, we need to be thinking the next step. Because if we continue to just focus on the existing buildings that are coming out of the ground, we will have greenfield projects as well that want to buy property and build a facility. So we always have to keep that in the back of our mind as well.
Go ahead. Well, thank you for the presentation. I think we're very well positioned. Sounds like we're competing with the typical Nashville, Atlanta, communities like that. Are those communities throwing out economic incentives? Is that kind of the next wave? Are you anticipating that we're going to have to do some things to win people? Or is it more along the lines of, we have the infrastructure in place, ready to build kind of sites, zoning, allow the zoning to be in place, water, sewer, stuff like that? Is that where we should be focusing our efforts in the future to help lure these companies?
Yeah, I think we are well positioned. I think especially the town of Huntersville, as you continue to make improvements to your infrastructure, that'll just be helpful. The tax rate is really interesting. You mentioned incentives. The tax rate at town is very low, which is a great thing. But sometimes when we put projects on paper, even though these companies are very sophisticated, we actually have a project right now, and if you ran a normal grant in Huntersville, they would qualify for $4,000 coming back, because it's a lot of jobs, but the investment's not very high. But if you compare that to a higher taxed area, that 4,000 may be 8,000 or 10,000. So we always try to make companies aware in the long run you benefit from that low tax rate. I'd say the Nashville and Atlanta markets, I think they're obviously benefiting from the same things Charlotte is seeing. The weather, despite the weather today, we're seeing a lot of interest from folks who are making the migration south. Our right to work state, we're the second lowest unionized state in the United States, behind South Carolina, so that makes us very attractive. And our corporate tax rate is very low as well. So I think you're going to continue to see Nashville and Charlotte compete pretty frequently. I think we have them beat by far on airport, but they have some other, they're right on a river. So it's a sell-off, if you're more focused on international travel, I think Charlotte's a better option. If you want a waterfront office, that's not really a reality right now in Charlotte.
So what's the process? Maybe this is for the town manager. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, wait a little while. We'll have waterfront all over.
That's right. Yeah. So Anthony, is this something that, we get with EDC and say, all right, this is where we think the next wave needs to be. This is where the infrastructure needs to be worked on. And is that something we need to put on our CIP, for, bringing sewer infrastructure, up there at Alexanderana? I mean, how do we do we collaborate together, or is that something that we let our public works department do, transportation?
So Ryan and I are collaborating on, so we have yearly meetings with Charlotte Water. I want to keep calling them CMUD all the time, but Charlotte Water, to show, where's our infrastructure, water and sewer now, where do we see potential growth? So how do we either get them in the hopper for the 5-year CIP? How do we expand those services and infrastructure out there? So we're constantly having those type meetings, and then also if there's a potential client that's looking at an area, and Ryan was talking, obviously don't want to say the area, but one of the areas we're looking at studying is folks are looking at it right now, and some major development, and it's almost like, all right, we got to jump to the next area. So as he said, we're in a good position. and things are moving real fast. But we continue to look at new areas where we expand that infrastructure. So that's an ongoing process that we stay in touch, and with Charlotte Water, because they're looking to say, hey, where do we want to invest? How can we get more people to tie in and generate more revenue, et cetera? So that's an ongoing discussion every year, trying to put projects in the CIP.
Have we ever done anything like a cost-sharing program with Charlotte Water to speed up the process?
The only things we've done is, we haven't per se on that. There has been some, when a project has come before, we have done maybe, even on CURS.
Yeah.
You maybe use that as an example.
Yeah, I think what we try to do is when we go to our utilities, if we have a site that's not served, we try to look, all right, what's the load created by that project? And does that justify them extending the line? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We also try to look, does this open up other opportunities? I think Patterson Road's the greatest example. CURS is a great project. We're so proud to have them, but they were part of the team. So we have a developer now who looks to build over 1 million square feet of space on Patterson Road because of the infrastructure that was put in place to assist CURS. So that's something we try to be strategic about. There's a particular sewer line that was ran for a company, and we worked with Charlotte Water and said, you know, while you guys are putting it in, can you extend it another 1,000 feet to open up this property for growth? So they are great to work with. Luckily, all of our utilities understand the importance of opening up new areas for new growth and being strategic about it. So we do have areas where we know sewer is the big issue in all three towns. So we're luckily the chief engineer of Charlotte Water sits on our board, and she's tremendously responsive with her staff.
So we have these areas identified where we'd like to have the infrastructure, but we don't have somebody like a CURS. Is there a way that we can become more proactive like we are with our town roads and other projects to get them shovel-ready to where, you know, we don't necessarily have to have somebody, but maybe we just put the infrastructure in knowing that they're gonna come?
On the program now, no, we don't have that. They have various programs, I'm sure you're aware of, reimbursement programs and things like that that are available, and they continue to fine-tune those. But as far as us, I'll say us, the town of Huntersville saying, you know, we want to advance extending water and sewer lines out to this area that has yet to develop. We haven't, and probably, I would assume the reason we haven't done that in past years and now is, I mean, stuff is coming. So we haven't had to do like more maybe of a rural area where we said, you know what, we can't get anything to come here. Let's put lines on out here and advance that and try to get folks to come. We just hadn't had that problem, thank God. So
Would the town even be eligible for a reimbursement program? I mean, I don't know what those rules are. I know private developers are, yes.
Possible, I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know the answer to that, because the reimbursement program, I know is, you know, 5-year reimbursable, you know, I'm not sure on that one. If we don't have a project in hand, I just have, maybe, I don't know, I'd have to get more information on that. Ryan, you may know the answer to that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know the private sector normally goes through that. I'm not sure, I guess it would be sort of equivalent to the carry model for DOT, but I'm not sure if that's available.
Thanks.
I have a couple. Is the park full yet? Do you know are there any lots available, or are they pretty full?
There are, yes, there are a couple, but there's a spec building proposed for it. There's another lot that's vacant, and there's a project in tow right now that has it identified. So in essence, it's very, very close to being fully built out.
And then when you're talking to the developers and then they start thinking about building here, are there any particular ordinances that seem to say, oh, wait, that's really going to be tough to overcome? And, you know, one of the examples is I was talking to the developer the other day, and it was this whole 80-foot buffer, and I'm not talking about the one on 21, I'm talking about something else, and you probably know who it is. So I'm just wondering if there are things that are coming up when you're trying to close a deal, even in the preliminary discussions, and then finally when we do land them, all of a sudden they come up again. So
yeah, I think luckily staff's very responsive and great to work with. I think if you go back and look at industrial in probably the 90s, how it was perceived, it was you know, maybe a metal building and smokestacks coming out. You saw Kerr's, you know, that looks more like an office building than an industrial building. So we always encourage the developers to reach out to Jack and his team first and say, okay, do you want to push, in essence, put your building up against the street? Well, a lot of times that doesn't really work. It works well for office or retail, but not really industrial, because you need to have your parking in the front and docks in the back. So that 80-foot buffer has been discussed before. And we have a couple projects right now, they're in tow, and they're saying, look, our building will have glass front, it's gonna look great. Are there any options to work within that buffer to get a little variance? So I know we've talked to the town planning staff about that, and you know, there's the option, you leave it wooded now and build your building back, or you can put in landscaping once the seasons make sense. So we have had that discussion before. I think another issue that's popped up recently is called cross-docking. We don't have a lot of cross-dock buildings in our area, and essentially what that means is you bring in a big truck, everything in the middle of the building is dispersed, and it comes out on the smaller trucks, maybe a panel van or something like that. And we're going to see those projects start to come into our market. And then how do we landscape those? Because you don't, I mean, as a citizen, you probably don't want to see a bunch of docks. You want it to be landscaped appropriately. So we'll probably have to look at tweaking some things as we move forward. We had to do that with a local company that had a sign that was too large. And I think that goes back to some of the regulations that were in place before we started seeing so much activity in a new modern industrial building, which has a lot of glass and a nice front to it. So we'll be glad to sit down and provide any input that we can. And I think I still remember we were working on a particular project, and someone said, "You'll never build that in Huntersville," and it was a third party, and I was like, "What are you talking about?" So you cannot build that building in Huntersville. I said, "Watch, we will," and it's here. Because you know, we showed them that yes, we do have, and all three towns have design standards, because we have a really nice, attractive area, and we want to keep it that way. But we are flexible as well. So I always stress that the companies and the developers meet with staff first, as opposed to, you know, here's what we want to build, having a discussion and saying, okay, what works? How do we need to tweak our design to fit with the town planning guidelines?
Any other questions? Okay. Well, close some deals.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity, and as always, if you need anything, just feel free to reach out, and we're here to help.
Great job, Brian, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
You saved us 30 seconds, right?
Not too bad.
All right, who's next on the hot seat?
Don's up.
Now, how come you got all the chocolate?
You want some?
First, Don,
Brian, you can have mine.
any outages over the last few days caused by all this weather?
No,
or
sir.
we're good? Well, thank goodness.
That's, I'm going to tell you, I'm glad to be here this morning, that I'm not dealing with ice-laden trees and broken
Yeah.
power lines. There's just two items I want to cover with you today. I want to talk about the cost of service study that was done last year, and just briefly touch on that and talk about the rate increases that's recommending for July of this year, and then take a quick look at the capital outlook for next year. This is a chart from the cost of service study. It was the beginning of the cost of service study, and this basically looked at what happens over the next 5 years with the increase in costs, the capital additions that need to be done, and this particular case assumes there's no rate increases. You'll see at the bottom line, the starting fund balance was just over $2 million. If you do nothing at the end of fiscal year 25, it'd be a negative $6 million fund balance. And you need to have about $7.6 million in fund balance to be a healthy fund balance.
Don, is it all right if I add in there too, that second from the bottom line assumes that we'll make a $3 million loan?
That's correct. That's for a substation project. We just took one snapshot here of another chart that was in the cost of service study, and if you wanted to fix things in one shot, it would take a 12.77% rate increase this July to get you to the place at the end of '25 where you'd have the $7.6 million fund balance. We realized one big rate increase wasn't going to be suitable, so we broke it up into a multi-year, about 4 years of rate increases. There'll be across the board rate increases in different rate classes. And again, this chart's too small to really look at in depth. So this is what we'll be recommending for this July. It's an overall 5.58% rate increase. Residential customers will see about a 5.75% rate increase. Small commercial will actually see a 3% decrease. Medium commercial, no change. Medium industrial, about a 4% increase. And the large industrial, about 11.4%. As you may recall, we did do an 11.4% rate increase to the large industrial this past fall.
Hey,
And then-
Don,
Yes, ma'am.
could you, because I know people are watching this who may not have kept up in the past, can you explain why the reduction in small commercial?
The cost of service study looks at what does it cost to serve this class of customer, and actually in the small commercial, you're over collecting, you're charging them more than what it costs to serve them right now. So this.
It's not a kickback or
No, it's
anything,
not
you're
a
fixing them
kickback.
wrong.
This is trying to balance the scales to
Okay.
where every rate class is paying their fair share to make sure that everything that we do is covered.
And I want to hesitate on this slide too and point out lighting service, that last column, the general fund, and Jackie and Patty and Kevin begin to hand wring a little bit over that number, because there's going to be an impact in the general fund of a lighting service increase of 20%. It's not gigantic, but it's enough worth noticing.
Yes, ma'am. So that's my run through of the cost of service study. Are there any questions about where we're heading with that? So to quickly move on to capital, there's two main areas of capital I wanted to remind you about. First is the substation project. Another study that we did was a long-range forecast that showed that there was a need for a substation in the northern part of our area. We hope to be securing the land for that before July of this year. Beginning in July, we'd start the engineering and procurement of major equipment for that substation. We think it'll be about $1.4 million that'll be spent in the next fiscal year. The following fiscal year, we'd actually construct the substation and have it in place by late '22, early '23. To go along with the yes, sir.
So the land, have you started negotiations with it, or?
We are in the process. There's a particular place that we're looking at. We're getting some appraisals and things done now. So we think by July or shortly thereafter, we'll be able to secure that property.
And Don, we don't get in front of you a whole lot, so will you speak a little bit to the need for the new substation? My perception is there's some system reliability issues there, and there's news topical this week that, I mean, we got a little hand wringing to do over that, I'm thinking. We don't want to be where they are.
That's correct. The long-range forecast that we brought to you last year as well showed that substation capacity is not sufficient to meet the load out 10 years from now. So the substation's needed just to be able to take care of the future load. It's a little tight right now, as a matter of fact, with a couple of the substations, and the next line item there, bulk feeder lines, is going to help relieve that. Typically, you want your electric system built to where there are lines leaving substations going to another substation, so that if you have a problem in one substation, you can transfer the load to the other substation. Well, that's lacking here to some extent, and the bulk feeder lines are another process we're doing to make sure there's strong tie points between substations, so that if if there's a failure in a substation, you can just transfer that load to another adjacent substation and not have.
Hey,
a
Don,
long
I live in Vermillion, and it comes up several times a year where literally 5 houses down, and then circling around, lights are on, and then you guys just don't like me and my neighbors, so my house up and going, the other part is out. Is that where these bulk feeder lines would
It
help?
will be. There's, that section of our system has some weak points, and the bulk feeder lines are gonna be, places where we can strengthen that and limit those outages in the future.
Gotcha, thank you.
You know you have to pay a bill every month.
I do.
All
of it.
So there's some overlap from Jack's presentation this morning about that new customer growth. So, there is a cost not just to the meter, but the transformers and capital associated with feeding those new customers. And from the number of people moving in, there's a significant impact on budget for that.
Gotcha.
That was kind of the major project we have is the substation project. The bottom part of this chart is talking about new growth. We're seeing tremendous increase in customers in Huntersville. You know, it looks like residential developments, we're gonna need to invest about $2.8 million next year in the facilities to serve those new developments. And then another slightly over $1 million in commercial and industrial developments. It's a good thing. Electric systems are great when there's load growth, increased customers, increased revenues. So we're in a very good situation, and I think you know, for years to come, we'll have an electric system that will work well for the town.
So Don, just a quick question. When a new subdivision's approved, they start breaking ground, you have to run underground utility power to those lots. That's part of that 2.8?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you're anticipating what's already been approved that's coming up, and then, okay, thank you.
Sometimes our crystal ball is not real good, though.
Sure.
We've had, I know the first year I was here, we had a development that we thought they were gonna build a fourth of it, and they came the second week in July and said, oh, we've changed our mind, we're building the whole thing. So, at times where we may have to come back and ask for some additional funds.
Yes, Don, I got a question for you. You've got a lot of new stuff here, new substation, new customer growth, but what are your plans for the people that have been here 20 and 25 years? Some of the older neighborhoods, at one time you said Electric Cities was gonna move the power lines from the back of the lots up to the street and switch out to a newer light bulb on those street lights. Where do you stand on that?
We are, as we replace lights now, we're going with LED lighting. So that is a process. Typically, if an older light fails or if we have to go work on it, we're putting an LED light in its place. There are some projects over the years for system improvements that as we come to a older subdivision, we'll be able to replace those lines. Typically, what we want to do in those situations is if there are some failures in there, then instead of continuing to make repairs, we'll come in and replace the facilities.
Do you have any neighborhoods for 2021, 22?
Right off the top of my head, I don't remember any that we've got planned for next fiscal year.
The Shepherd's Vineyard doesn't ring a bell to you that you told me that you said? Boy.
No, I don't think we have, we don't have any plan for next year. We're pretty much treading water to keep up with the new growth right now.
Like I said, we were forgetting the people that have been here for a while and paying their bills and worried about all of this new growth. Okay.
I understand. We'll see if we can work some of those in, but it's, we're struggling just to keep up with the new growth right now. That was it. Are there any other
You got to
questions?
handle human resources too?
Quick question.
Hey, Don, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. You can go back through to the, your budget and, one or two before that, yeah. One more, sorry. Right here. Okay, so I'm just kind of following along, and you asked, one of the options is to have a 12.77 rate increase, and it would help us go from a current fund balance or projected reserve of 2 million to 7.6 million. Wouldn't it make more sense to ask for a lower rate increase just to try and maintain
Well, that-
the reserves, or is there something specific you're trying to plan for to
No,
get to
that-
7.6?
This was just a kind of snapshot of what would it take for a one-time rate increase to get you to the $7.6 million. This is actually the plan we're taking. This next chart is the plan we're taking, where there's a 5.88% overall rate increase this coming year, and then a 2.3% rate increase overall the following year, another 5.88% rate increase the following year,
Right.
and a 2.4% rate increase.
The one thing I'm missing here, maybe I'm just not seeing it, and it's smaller print. Where would this put you in terms of 2025 reserve balance?
It gets us back to the $7.6 million.
And why do you want to get to 7.6? Why not stay at 2?
To have, the consultant that did the cost of service study recommended a $7.6 million fund balance to have sufficient funds to take care of cash flows, to take care of unforeseen emergencies, those type things.
So are we saying right now we're not capable of being able to handle an unforeseen emergency?
If you lost a substation at this time, the cost to replace that would take all your fund balance probably.
They may have to take out a loan from the town per se.
Right.
And we
I
try to
appreciate it. I
separate
just
that.
want to understand and make sure people understand why we're trying to get to 7.6. So,
Or
Thank
think
you.
of a hurricane or a tornado.
Yep.
So my question was going to be the capital improvements. You mentioned you're treading water. Do those capital improvements get us to just 1% over treading water, to 30% over treading water? Does there need to be more, given our, not only our growth, but kind of your example of, hey, they went from 25% to 100%?
The treading water is staffing is really what I'm talking about. Is
Okay.
that, yeah, we're focusing most all of our staff time on new developments right now to a big extent, and we're not neglecting, but we're not doing as much maintenance as we would otherwise.
So are you anticipating staff increases?
I don't think so at this time. I think as we go forward, we're going to see that we're okay. We've been short-staffed for the last 2 years. We've never, as long as I've been here, we've never been at full staff. So I really want to get to full staff and see what we're capable of.
How many employees do you guys need to hire to be at full staff?
We're short 2 line technicians right now, and then there's a customer service rep that we're short, and a accounting person and a warehouse person.
Do you
that we're
guys have
short.
the jobs listed online?
Yes.
Can the town post that on our social media to see if we can get them some help?
Yes, yes. I'll make sure we talk to Bobby about that,
All
yes.
right, thank you.
Is there a theme here to why, I mean, I know our police department's down some officers, we kind of know that's a national problem. Are we not paying enough? Because it seems like that's a broad spectrum of different kind of jobs.
It is hard to compete with, say, a Duke for linemen. Is that fair?
It's countrywide in the electric industry right now. There's just been a shortage of line technicians for several years. It's not a real glamorous job. It's not something that a lot of young people are moving into these days. So, you know, it's.
Are we looking
we play
at,
the game of, well, this guy's going to pay me $1 more, so I'm going over there, and but I think we're in a good place. We've started a lineman career development program where we're going to be able to bring young people in, give them a clear path of, here are the steps you need to do to get to a journeyman line level position, and you know, here's the pay range that will go along with that, so. I
Without
think
getting into the weeds, are we doing, I know at HPD, they did some incentive programs.
we don't have any type of incentive program right now.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. One, how are we doing with burying lines? You know, we've seen stuff going on, great, but how close? And one of the things we don't want to do is slow down, right?
Right.
So how are we doing with that?
I think, particularly along the Highway 115 Main Street area, we've got projects over the next few years to complete all the line burials there. And then, you know, as I envision it, will continue going on to some of the other areas of town to bury lines in years to come.
So we're ready to let the project for Main Street,
We're
No.
out of the way for Main
Yeah,
Street right
right.
now.
that's great. And then Southwire provides the connections for utilities. So do we use any of their stuff? And if so, is it?
I'm not aware of us buying
Okay.
any wire, any Southwire conductor recently. We go out for bids and it's whoever the company's bid.
Okay. Think they'd show us some love?
I just have a couple follow-up questions. Commissioner Boone asked about existing neighborhoods. You know, we have CIPs for sidewalks, for, you know, roads, et cetera. And then the question is about burying lines. Do we have a list that we can see that shows us future neighborhood conversions, we'll call them, or line burials, or?
We do not have a list currently. Again, as I was trying to say earlier, in a residential area, we're gonna hope that as long as the conductors and facilities are working, we're not going to just go in and replace those right away. If we start having some failures, that's when we put those on a list to update those. And again, I don't have a list right now of those. We do have a fund in the capital budget for asset replacements that's there every year, just in case something comes up that we can go ahead and take the advantage of those funds to go in and replace the lines in that area.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions, Mr. Mitchell? All right. Well, like I
Thank you.
said, I'm glad you didn't ice last night. I don't think you would have been here today.
Hey, Don, I just wanted to let you know, whoever does your social media, like your Twitter and stuff, they're doing a great job with the updates, with the time, with the outages and stuff. They're doing really good. I've heard compliments about that.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Oh, wow, 10 minutes ahead of schedule. So, we will break for lunch and stretching and walking and eating and start checking on your emails.
How much time do we have, Mr. Mayor?
Come back at 12:30, but let's be ready to roll.
All right.
12 extra minutes.
I don't think the food's here yet, Mayor, but,
Huh?
email and phone call.